Okay, so now we're on page 40. We're looking at conflict. We've talked about conflict before. So you should be able to tell me these notes because this is not the first time we've talked about conflict. So you tell me conflict is the struggle between opposing what?
Forces.
Forces. Good. Forces. It could also be characters.
But wouldn't forces just be an all-rounder term?
Or emotions. Yes, Nicholas, but we just want to be a little bit more specific today. Now, conflict affects a lot of the story. It affects characters. It builds suspense. And it drives plot. If we wrote a story where there was no conflict, we really wouldn't have any plot. It would just be like, this happened. And then that would be about it. Because conflict might be something major, like good versus evil, or the bad guy versus the good guy, but it also could be something minor, like you really want Oreos and they only have regular. And everyone knows that you can't eat regular Oreos, you have to eat double stuff.
What?
That could be conflict.
Why can't you eat regular Oreos?
Because it's not the same, Cody.
Yes, it is. It's just double stuff.
Not doing it. Not doing it.
Exact
Okay, so for each of these 4 boxes, I apologize, the boxes are not very clear, but I want you to tell me, is this an external conflict or an internal? What about man versus man? External? External.
Do we just write it big or do we write it like, are we going to write something else?
We're going to write one more thing underneath this. Who can give me an example of a man versus man conflict?
Superman.
Yes, Gabe.
Me versus Cody.
Okay, Gabe versus Cody would be
That's not fair.
a man versus man
Yo.
conflict.
I'm definitely
Beast
gonna win
versus
it.
man.
I'm definitely
The
gonna win.
dangerous game or whatever that we have.
Dangerous
I'm
game.
winning.
Had man
I'm
versus man.
winning.
Okay, Cody says he's gonna win. Can anybody give me an example
I'm not
of
scared.
man versus man in the book Thief?
Oh no.
Hans versus
Hans versus
the dude that was on
Nazis.
the bus that made him force us to
Hans versus
see.
his coworker. We forgot his name,
Ooh,
so we'll just say
Jewish, what
coworker.
about Rudy versus the Jewish?
Rudy versus his bully, Franz
Yeah.
Deutscher.
What does that say? Okay.
Coworker. All of these are good. So we've got man versus man. What about man versus self? Internal or external? Internal.
Internal.
Now this one's a little bit trickier, but who can give me an example of man versus self?
Max.
Max is a good example. What does Max struggle with?
Trying to stay in the basement.
His fears, his doubts, what he should do. He has a lot of internal struggles. What about the next one? And I've kind of combined two. Man versus nature / the supernatural. We don't see the supernatural in the book Thief so much, but is this internal or external? We can count that.
What's supernatural?
It's external. What would be a good example of man versus nature?
Hans avoiding death every time.
We could say Hans avoiding death. That would probably be supernatural. Eli has called me. Hans versus death. What's an example of man versus nature, like in our own life? It doesn't have to come from the book Thief. Yes, Gabe.
Isn't death supernatural?
Yes. So we're gonna say that that's
Oh, okay.
supernatural.
Not
I
just.
said Eli
I thought
called
you
me.
meant like.
Max, isn't Max technically the one that? Didn't Max say he would punch death in the face when he tried to come get him, and didn't he not die when he was about to?
Good. We could say Max versus death as well for supernatural. Keep in mind that man versus nature is going to be things like you versus a tornado, or in the most dangerous game when he tries to swim to shore and he's trying not to drown. Natural events. Last one, man versus society. God bless you. Internal or external? External.
Weird laugh.
Man versus society. Now, a good example that we see in this story would be Max versus Nazis. Good. We could even say Germany.
Could you do Hans versus the Nazis?
We could say Hans versus the Nazis. Good. Really, we could say all of them.
Yeah.
Levi Liesel, even Rudy, although he doesn't know about Max until later in the story, all of them disagree with these ideals, and so we could put them under man versus society. And so, when we get to the second box, or this next box, identify the main conflict in the novel and the type. What do you think is the biggest conflict that we deal with?
Man versus
World
society.
War II.
Man versus society, World War II, the Nazi politics, trying to survive. All of those things play into it. So we've got man versus society. So it's the individual characters versus the Nazis / the war. Individuals, like individual characters. I wasn't gonna write all their names down because I'm lazy.
Understood.
I appreciate it.
How lazy people are not gonna watch this video.
That is me. Why is
Miss
it?
Penny, I'll watch the video.
Thank
I'll
you.
watch
I
it,
appreciate
even on.
I'll watch it just to see if I can.
I'll try not to.
Okay, last question. Will, since you're so talkative, you take a crack at it. How does this conflict build suspense? You just have to answer the first question. How does this conflict build suspense?
Because they have to hide Max.
Good. They have to hide Max.
They do it.
So we're not sure, is Max going to get caught? Is Max going to be okay? We don't know. So that definitely builds suspense. How does it drive the plot? How does the war create a story? The bombs, we know that they're going to bomb Himmel Street, but we don't know when. All of that plays into that. We know that war is coming and that terrible things are going to happen, but we don't know when, right? Okay, so now flip to the next page, 41. I'm not going to change this slide yet so that you can keep taking notes if you need to. But we look at 4 different characters: Rosa, Max, Frau Hatzapfel, and Liesel. I want you to identify how does this conflict affect them, and I want you to pull some evidence from the book. It doesn't have to be a direct quote. It could be just be an example, but include some evidence and then answer the 2 questions, and that's the page that you will submit.